A line from a poem about the sea. A line from a poem about stars. A line from a poem about birds. A line from a poem about trees. A full stop from a poem about the sea. A full stop from a poem about stars. A full stop from a poem about birds. A full stop from a poem about trees. A series of spaces from a poem about the sea. A series of spaces from a poem about stars. A series of spaces from a poem about birds. A series of spaces from a poem about trees. Underlining from a poem about the sea. Underlining from a poem about stars. Underlining from a poem about birds. Underlining from a poem about trees. A footnote from a poem about the sea. A footnote from a poem about stars. A footnote from a poem about birds. A footnote from a poem about trees. Highlighted text from a poem about the sea. Highlighted text from a poem about stars. Highlighted text from a poem about birds. Highlighted text from a poem about trees. A line crossed out from a poem about the sea. A line crossed out from a poem about stars. A line crossed out from a poem about birds. A line crossed out from a poem about trees. A link to a poem about the sea. A link to a poem about stars. A link to a poem about birds. A link to a poem about trees. A bullet point from a poem about the sea. A bullet point from a poem about stars. A bullet point from a poem about birds. A bullet point from a poem about trees. A quote from a poem about the sea. A quote from a poem about stars. A quote from a poem about birds. A quote for a poem about trees. A word erased from a poem about the sea. A word erased from a poem about stars. A word erased from a poem about birds. A word erased from a poem about trees. Dialogue from a poem about the sea. Dialogue from a poem about stars. Dialogue from a poem about birds. Dialogue from a poem about trees. Italics from a poem about the sea. Italics from a poem about stars. Italics from a poem about birds. Italics from a poem about trees. Capital letters from a poem about the sea. Capital letters from a poem about stars. Capital letters from a poem about birds. Capital letters from a poem about trees.
Imagine bodies sitting on chairs next to each other, listening to a memory. Remembering a beach without ocean, a child drawing between tiles, a water slide sinking into the pillow, the egg, the beginning of a bridge touching, water, a mountain of shy clothes, round pine needles, a shower in a fountain. In the imagination of somebody, there is no carpet, no piano, no silence, no fireplace, no stucco, no chandelier. Eyes are waiting for darkness to arrive as well. No trees in front of the windows, no grey curtains, no black curtains, no time. Bodies arriving, night arriving, nights arriving. There is music playing in the distance, and an eye imagines the music to play again, in this moment. And some ears listen to the memory of music playing in the distance. The music stops. A silent echo spirals through the outer left ear. Spirals deeper, to meet air entangled with resonance. In the vibration of cartilage and fascia, speaking high-pitched memories of images. Vanishing deeper down to the right ear of an organ. Winding in lower frequencies, announcing a ground under your feet. Touching the navel of the carpet, piercing through the room, through other imperfects. When borders of bodies melt with the backgrounds, I listen to the swallow of saliva in the bony labyrinth. Coming back as word, created with care from the intestines, formed with fluids and oxygen, traveling blindly through the room, seducing your hearing devices, knocking tenderly on your eardrum. To mingle with your chemicals, to play with the nerves, to find breathing cells, to wonder what the word feels in your stomach and how it rotates backwards, creating an image spiraling out your navel, into the room, into the carpet, into perfect tense. Thank you.
Oh, that was so beautiful. Amazing. Beautiful.